Hello, this is David Steinken with Dynamic Consulting. Today we're going to walk through budget planning functionality. So we'll walk through the setup and configuration for budget plans, which has quite a few steps. And then also we'll process a budget plan from start to completion as well. So budget planning functionality is some complexity for sure, but once you've configured it properly, it really can be a pretty useful tool to manage your organization's budget processing for the year or however years, depending on how you do it. All right, so for our demo today, we're going to create our own budget plan in our AX 2012 environment. This is a demo environment, so there is some configuration that's there. Some of it I've added in already, so we'll just walk through that as we go. And some of it I'll create from scratch as we walk through it. Okay, so starting with that, let's actually dive into spreadsheet here that I put together. So budget planning is really about determining what your budget planning process is. So every organization has a process for how they go through and compile their budget over the course of their planning season, whether that be a week or a month or a few months. And then truly mapping that out into stages and scenarios. We'll talk about that in a second. And then once you've gone through and done that, the configuration in AX is simply nothing more than mapping that process into AX so that you can follow that process as you go through. All right, so what you're looking at here in this spreadsheet is a sample process that we're going to walk through. You can see that we're going to start out with a finance budget, if you will. So that will be a so we're starting with a budget process that involves the finance department where our budget is going to originate. So that really is going to be our, I guess, our top level budget, if you will. And I would suspect that that's true in a lot of organizations. The finance department is primarily responsible for managing and compiling and then finalizing the budget. And then you can see underneath that, we're going to have three departments as well. I've listed those over to the side here: sales, marketing, operations, and IT department. The process that we'll walk through is over to the left on what we would call stages. Stages are part of the budget plan. And really, if you think about it, these are the different stages that our budget process is going to walk through. So as we go through, create a budget, we have our top level department, if you will, a finance team will create the initial budget for the organization for the upcoming fiscal year. They'll then distribute that to the departments, right? So at some point, every department will get their portion of the budget to review. And then we go over here now to our department area, and we have a couple more stages after that. So each department head or department team, depending on your organization, or in this case, our sample organization, will review that department level budget, their piece of it. They may make changes to it. They may have some different requests, if you will, for that. And then they'll submit that back to the finance team. So you can see here the stage after that is submitted. Then there's this stage after that, we're calling it aggregate, which really in AX terms means compile all the departments back. So it's going to take the distributed department budgets and then aggregate them or summarize them back together up to the finance team. And then after that, the CFO and the finance team will go through, review it, they'll approve it. And at that point, our budget process is done for the year. Okay, so we, in our budget process, have determined these are the stages. So these are what we will set up and walk through as we walk through our plan today. AX also has this concept of scenarios, which are somewhat of a misnomer as far as naming convention is concerned. A scenario really represents a piece of data, right? So in this case, you can see some of our scenarios are fairly straightforward. We'll have, as part of our budget, we want to see what the previous year actual was from our general ledger. We want to see what our previous year budgeted amounts were, so we can use that to create a baseline budget for the current year. We also then will have a scenario called department requested. So when we distribute our top level budget to each department, the department can go in and make changes to that if they want to, and they'll put those values or update those values in the department requested area. And then there's a total approved, right? So then the finance team will get those department requests, they'll review those along with their baseline, and they'll have a total approved. And that value ultimately becomes our budget for the year. So we have our stages, we have our scenarios, and now what we have over here is a representation of what we call of two pieces of functionality within the budget plan configuration. One is allocation schedules, and the second is stage allocation. So these two things, which we'll see as we go through the configuration, really take the stages and the scenarios and map them together. So what this is a representation of is at each stage of our budget plan process, what data we want to see in which in our scenarios. And then we also plot out the movement of that data as it walks through the different stages in our plan. So this is very important to work out prior to any configuration within AX for this process. You can see, as we talked about a moment ago, we're going to create our initial budget, previous year actual budget, our baseline. We're going to distribute those values to our departments, right? And we'll see how we can manage that within AX. Those departments will then review that. They'll update that information with the department requested, submit it. When they do that, those numbers actually will come back to our top level budget and then also to our total approved value, to where then again the finance team can review that. And then finally, once they approve it, your budget plan is done. Okay. So I will minimize this for now. We'll reference this back once we're done. So now we're going to start out in Dynamics AX. You can see I'm already on the budgeting module, right? So if I go into budgeting, you can see we'll have budget plans. And then here in the configuration, we have our budget plan configuration. We'll walk through all that. Before we do any of that, though, the first step to our configuration really lies in our organization admin. So I'm going to go down to org admin. And the first thing we need to do is create an organizational hierarchy. We want to map out the hierarchical structure, if you will, of how we're going to do our budgeting. So typically that is independent of any other hierarchy you've created. You can use an existing one if you want to. Specifically for this process, though, my recommendation would be to create one that is uniquely for your budgeting process. So we can get to that in a couple of different ways. We can do that either through our common menu, organizations here, organizational hierarchies, or we can go down to the setup and we can go here to organizational hierarchies as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So in this case, you can see all the hierarchies that have already been pre-configured or set up in this environment. I created this budgeting departments 3. This hierarchy is going to emulate what we saw a couple minutes ago in our spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and we can view that. Okay, so just as we represented before in the spreadsheets, you can see we have our finance department. And then underneath that, in our hierarchy, we have sales and marketing, operations, and IT. If I want to see any details for that, I can just go right into organizational details. And that will bring up some more information about our operating unit. One key piece of information that will reference back are the managers, right? So for every department, you can see, I can just toggle on some of these. If I click here, actually, if I click here, you can see sales and marketing, Julia is our manager. If I go to operations, I'll save some time here. Molly is our manager. And then the IT department, we have Tim. Okay, so it is important to note that these resources need to be identified here if they're not already. And it's important also that these resources, from a security standpoint, be assigned either to this department here or is part of their employee setup. So we'll walk through that security in a little more detail here in a bit, but just note that you want to make sure that managers are assigned to these departments. Okay, the other thing that's important for your hierarchy is the purposes, right? So as we create hierarchies, we have to assign them different purposes. I can just click on that. There are two purposes already assigned to this particular hierarchy. I think you may have seen that on the way in. We have budget planning and security. There are many purposes that we can assign to hierarchies for different things in 365, in AX. There are many things we can, there are many different purposes you can assign to your hierarchies based on what you want to use them for in AX. For our case, there are two that we need to ensure get assigned. One is budget planning. This will identify this hierarchy as one that can be used as part of a budget plan process. The second is security, right? So we have an option, and again, I'll show you this in a few minutes, where we can use the security model in AX to determine who has access to which pieces of your hierarchy. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this. So now we're going to go back to budgeting. And as I said, we're going to do most of the configuration is managed in the budgeting module itself. So to get to that, we can go into Setup, Budget Planning Configuration. When I do that, it opens up our planning configuration form, and you can see there are probably 8 or 9 different menu options here over to the side where we can go through and work at our configuration. Okay, the first thing we want to talk about then are parameters, right? So we have a few here. One of the more important things to note here is security. We talked about a few minutes ago. Security models within budget plans can be done one of two ways. We can either base it on worker positions or based on security organizations. If you base it on worker positions, then if you are setting up your resources in the HR module, you assign them to positions. Every position has a department assigned to it. So any resource assigned to that department would then have access potentially to that budget plan. You can also use security organizations. So on the user itself, you have the ability to determine which hierarchies and, which budget plans and or which pieces of those plans that a user can have access to. I'll show you that in a little bit. We are going to keep this on security organizations for this demonstration. We also have the ability to assign user groups to specific budget plans and manage security through those as well. All right, Next thing we're going to talk about here is scenarios. So we talked about scenarios a few minutes ago, right? Where scenarios really represent some piece of data for your budget plan. Most likely it is some numeric value, right, that you are using as part of your budget. You can see there are quite a few examples here, including the ones we talked about before that we'll use for our scenario today, or our budget plan today. You have your prior year actuals, your prior year budget. You'll see us use that. We're going to use baseline. We're going to use our department requested, and we're going to use our total approved. So if I want to add one in, it's a very simple process. I simply click add. I can give it a name, so whatever you want to call it, give it a description. And then we have a unit of measure class, right? So we have quite a bit of different units of measure. So if you are managing or defining your budgets and you want to include some information other than actual dollar amounts, then you can certainly do that. That can be everything from quantity to volume to everything you see here. More often than not, you're going to select monetary, and that will actually mean that based on the value that you assign or enter to this particular scenario, that's what it'll represent. Okay, so I'm going to remove that out for now. We have the scenarios that we're going to use. All right, very good. Next thing we're going to talk about then are stages. So stages, as we talked about earlier, are the actual planning stages that we will walk through the course of our budgeting process. So as we talked about, we're going to have an initial budget. We're going to distribute it to our departments. They're going to review it. At that point, they will aggregate it, really. They'll send it back and then have a CFO review. At that point, we're going to use a submitted and approved. So these are the various stages. You can see there's a couple other ones here that came with the demo data. To add a stage, you can see very easily, all we'd have to do is add again here, click new stage. You can see I'm not creative with my test samples here, but you get the idea. So for the moment, all we have to do is create a name and a description, and there's additional configuration below. All right, so I'm going to remove that for now. All right, our next configuration is workflows. So budget plans and the budget plan process is workflow driven, meaning that the workflow is required in order to fully execute this process. It doesn't have to necessarily be approvals only for a workflow. What I mean by that is workflows are really the engine that are going to drive the process, right? So as we walk through our stages, workflows are really the mechanics, if you will, of what's going to drive it from one step to the next. I've created 2 workflows for our demo today. The first one you can see is our demo top level workflow. So this is what we're going to assign to our finance team, right? And those stages. So if you remember, I'm going to go back for a second to our spreadsheet. We have our stages, we have our top level, and have our department. That top level workflow will be the one that moves our workflow along these stages here. And then the department level workflow is what these budget plans will have assigned to them that will drive these steps here. So just like every other workflow in AX, as we go through and submit it and then have it work through its stages, the workflow will actually move our process from one to the next to the next. So you can see here, as I've set up my various workflows, I have to add some additional properties to them. So I give it a budget planning name and description. I can also go find that specific workflow. We'll go look at some workflows here in a couple minutes. So you can get a little sense of how these are built. We're going to require, do we require a parent budget plan? You can do that, so it's going to force this to be to have a parent budget plan. In our case, it's not required, but I'm going to do that. The top level will be our finance team. Our department level is going to be our departments, as we've talked about. We can also restrict and not allow budget plans to be deleted. In this case, I'll leave it unchecked, but again, you can set that so that way any of your departments or whatnot don't go through to your budget plan and accidentally delete it out. Okay, and then for each of these, you can see we assign stages that are specific to each one, just as you saw in our spreadsheet of assign those particular stages. Okay. All right, so I'm going to close this for a moment. And I'm going to go into budgeting workflows. You can see there are two workflows here that I just talked about, the top level and the departments. I'm going to actually open up the top level here. All right, so here it's finally opened. And you can see we have a few different steps here as part of our process, right? So there's more than just approval steps. We have a couple of different things here. We have this stage transition and we have the allocation stages. So as I talked about a few minutes ago, the workflow is really the engine that drives this process along. So you can see in our workflow process, we're going to change stages, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we'll change it from an initial status to our distribution status, and then we have an approval, right? So after that, we're then going to, this budget planning stage is really what will move forward and move the scenario data from one stage to the next. And then we have a checklist here. So you can see I'm not going to walk through all of this, and it's a little, I've got a little convoluted here as well if you follow the arrows. But as I said, workflow is really what's going to drive this process. So as we submit our workflow, once the plan is created, we'll go through various stages. You'll have various checkpoints here as well. And once we do that, once we walk through all those stages, everything's complete. All right, so we'll go ahead and cancel this out. I know it's a little hard to see some of these, but let's go ahead and cancel this for now. We'll come back. All right, I'm going to go back to our configuration. So we created a couple of workflows, as I talked about, the top level and the department level. The department level one is a little simpler of one. It's really just a couple of steps in there, but you'll see that process here in a few minutes. So this is what I meant about workflows, and then again, assigning stages to them and them being the engine to those, to the process. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is scenario constraints. So what do I mean by that? So then we have the option in each of the scenarios. If you remember, when a scenario representing a value, we have our workflow and we have the various stages as well. So it's a little challenging to kind of see here. But what we're doing essentially is when we start with our plan, right, with our budget plan, we're going to start in an initial stage. When doing that, we're saying, all right, for this initial stage, we're really only going to use three scenarios. We're going to use budget year, the previous year budget, previous year actual, and the baseline. Again, if we go back to our spreadsheet, you can see we only want these three columns, right? We're not ready for these yet. You'll see these will get created as we go along. So we only want these three values to be the ones we use in that stage. Scenario constraints are what we use to manage that. So for that stage, right, again, we've assigned the top level, we assigned the stage to it. we only want these 3 scenarios. Now, with each of those scenarios, we have the option to say, you know what, I want this field to be editable, which makes sense. We're going to go ahead and actually populate that. I'll show you that here in a few minutes. Or I can make it view only. You can see there's other ones here that are view only. So I only want to create it, but I don't want anybody changing it. And really, for prior year budget or prior year actual, why would I want to change that, right? It is what it is. I don't want people changing those. For our demo today, I've left everything in an edit mode. It's just easier to work with. But really, you can say, I only want certain things editable and other things to be view only. So as we walk through our various stages, right? Remember, again, we've signed a workflow. We create the stage. That's a little annoying. We are saying now for those same things, so those 3 stage scenarios, we can also edit those. When we go to the next stage, you can see as we get through our stages, we're going to assign more of those scenarios, right? We look back to our spreadsheet, when we get all the way to the CFO review, we're using all these. So we have to enforce that through those scenario constraints. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about are allocation schedules. Let me expand that out a little bit. Maybe. Okay. Allocation schedules. So this is really the movement of data from one stage to the next. So what we talked about earlier in our spreadsheet again, where we are moving data. So we're taking data from the top line budget and distributing that to our departments. You can see that's really represented by these arrows. So each of these arrows is configured as a budget planning allocation schedule. So you can see we're here in the allocation schedules, and you can see we have 3 distributions that we're doing, right? So when we distribute those to the departments, we're defining what the source is and what the destination is for each of those, right? And then you can see there's this allocation method called distribute. So when we use that method, we're telling AX, take the top line data, push it down and distribute it to the department, and take it from that top line baseline, move it to the department baseline. We have some other options here as well. Let me just create a test one for a second so you can see what that looks like. We have other allocation methods as well. We can use this to allocate data across periods. We can allocate to financial dimensions. We can set up specific ledger allocation rules. So if you're budgeting something where you're doing monthly allocations, you can actually use that to distribute those as well. And then we also have the aggregation, right? So when we talked about in our spreadsheet where we're taking data from the departments and then bringing it back to the top level, that's what aggregation means as well. So we have to define all that here in these schedules. All right. Next, we go to stage allocations. So this is really where we're telling AX is part of the process. At what point do we initiate or run these schedules? So we want in the distribution stage to run these 3 schedules, right? So this is where we're actually telling it push that data. And then in the aggregate stage, to pull that data back to the top level. So as this all comes together, as we walk through a workflow and we hit submit or we walk to the next stage, right? The workflow changes the stage, right, from initial to distribute. When it does that, it's going to run these schedules, right, and push or move the data from A to B, as we saw in the schedule. And then as our workflow then gets, pushes our plan to this stage, it's going to execute these 2 schedules, right, where it's taking those aggregates and then putting them back to the top level. So we defined these a couple of minutes ago. Now we're saying at what stage we want these to run. And then remember, the workflow is the actual engine that's going to drive all this so that we can actually move forward. So it will actually execute these stages. All right. We also have the ability to create priorities for our budget plans. I haven't really created one. I'm not going to use that for part of this demo, but we can certainly do that. So we can set different priorities, I guess, really for you to manage. We have something here called folders as well. So as I expand that out a little bit, that's going to look a little funky, but we have the ability to create templates for our budget plan. So templates are Excel templates that we can use to distribute to our departments or our teams so that they don't necessarily have to do their planning in AX itself. We can send them a spreadsheet that has the budget plan in it. The budget plans as we just generate those, will come out to one of these particular folders, and you'll see where we can sign those in a bit. And then once we do that, the teams can make those changes to those templates and then return that we can push those back into AX. All right, so we create those, and we also have templates as well. So these budget plan templates, we really have two template types, right? So the one is the worksheet, which is what I was just talking about, where we can create different templates for our budget plans. I'll show you how to do that here in a moment. And then we also have this justification template. Justification template can be a Word document that we can use to capture a really centralized capture for information about the budget process. So as an example, I have a budget plan and I'm one of the departments. Let's say I'm the IT department. I've made a change or I'm making a request for specific additional dollars for my department for the year. I can use that justification template to record and put in why I want those additional dollars. Again, so I don't have to use an offline document somewhere. I can include that, incorporate that, and link that to my budget plan. All right, so there are two ways that you can create budget plan templates. The first way is you can manually create a spreadsheet and then add all the information in it, or you can use the wizard. I'll show you how you can do it manually here in a minute. I'm going to use the wizard, and this is what I recommend doing it anyway. It's much simpler. I will say that if you create a template through the wizard and then want to make changes to it, you'll have to do those updates manually after that to that template. Again, I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. So we're going to go ahead and click on the wizard here and generate a budget plan worksheet template. Let's go ahead. I click on that. This is going to help us create that. I'm going to hit next. Okay, so I have to give our template a name. I created one earlier, so I'll just give it a similar type name. If I go down a little more, or demo template 2. All right. So I got to pick the folder that I want it to go in. So I'm going to put this in my templates folder. And I think I got the right one here. It's really a little challenging to see, but I think I got it. Nope. Let's make sure. There we go. So it's going to go into our templates folder. It's going to be for this legal entity, and this is the account structure I'm going to use with it. So this is key as well, especially for they have different account structures for, let's say, our revenue accounts or our cost accounts or whatnot. So make sure you select the right account structure here. Going to hit next. All right, so now I'm going to decide what headers or what values I want to see in my plan. So the first thing is asking me for what are the header fields. So really this is going to be like the budget plan document number. So I definitely want to put that in there. I want to put the plan preparer in there, and I want to put the plan itself, budget plan. Let's just do that. All right, so at this point, I'm going to move on to my next step. So I've got some header fields. So now it's going to ask me what are some of the columns that I want in my template as well. So really what I want to see here, you can see there's quite a few things we can select from. I'm going to select my, let's see, my ledger dimension. So I'm going to really do it by, this is going to be by department as we talked about earlier. So let's do my department, put my department description. Maybe I want to see the business unit and that description as well. And then I definitely want to see the main accounts, and I don't remember all the names of those, so I'm going to put that over here. And you can see I have a few other things here too. So there's so the budget plan, if I'm doing assets or if I'm doing positions, right, for HR, we can bring those data in. For this case, this is strictly financial. We'll talk about some of this here in a few minutes. So my next and final piece here is after that. I've got a few more values to put in. So you remember all the scenarios that we had here? All the scenarios that we want to see that we've defined in our template are what we want to see in our spreadsheet. So I'm going to do this in a certain order. I want to see the previous year budget, previous year actual. I want to see my baseline. I want the department requested, and I want the total approved. So you can see if I go in here, I can move these up and down if I didn't get them in the right sequence. You can see there's a couple other available ones here also. One thing to note is that these fields aren't here automatically, so I had to create some of these fields. Some of these values, as we talked about, these are scenarios, right, that we created up top. To make sure that these get added or can be added to our template wizard, there's this matrix fields function. There's also a separate menu option for that. I'll show you that here in a second. So we'll go ahead and for the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and click next. And now we are ready to finish our spreadsheet. So remember our demo template 2. I'm going to go ahead and hit finish here. I'd used a preview function, but that takes a little bit of time for it to kind of figure itself out. So we can just go into the spreadsheet here in a minute. Once it's done, you can see that it's processing, and we'll just wait for that to finish. All right, so that is done. You can see it created a spreadsheet down here. So let me go ahead and open that up. Let me a little further. All right, so you can see what it's done. Let me pop that a little more this way. What we've done is create a template, right? So this is using the AX add-in. You can see in our menu option up here, there's an AX add-in function. We have some functionality here. This is what's actually making the connection to AX. So if you don't have this installed, I think a lot of people do. If you don't, this is an easy add-in and an easy install. And this is really how the connection is made between our spreadsheets and Dynamics AX. So you can see there's our template name. There's the 3 header fields that we talked about. Here are the department, the business unit, the main account, and then our actual scenarios are over here. All right, and if I click on this, you can see if I go into the planning and then the templates directory, oops, no, that was under planning here, then here, sorry about that. There it is right there, just got created. Okay, let me minimize that for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I don't need to save it, it's already out there. All right, so now we've done with that. We have gone through the configuration. And at this point, our next step is to create our budget plan process. So I'll get that out of the way. We've done our configuration. Now we actually have to define our process. And then once we get that done, we can then start generating budget plan. So to do that, again, I'm going to go under budget planning process. You can see there's quite a few examples here, and we're going to create a new one. So let's go ahead and create new. Gonna create, sure, we'll go with that again. Let's say budgeting. And we'll give it a description as well. All right, so at this point, I have to pick my budget cycle. So I'm actually going to do this for fiscal year 2019. So we're assuming that we're coming out of, or they were still in fiscal year 2018 for this example, although I know the date is well into 2019. But we'll just do it for the fiscal year. And again, I have to pick in this case, I have to pick the legal entity that I'm going to do this for. We're in USMF. All right, so you can see we're in a draft state. So now there's some setup that I have to do here for this budget planning process. So really what this process represents is this spreadsheet, right? So this process is going to really represent everything about what we've talked about here. We've basically built all the pieces for it. Now we're assembling it together in this planning process. And then from here, we can move forward with the actual planning cycles and stages itself. All right, so I'm going to put a template on a folder here to go find our template. Remember, we had one set up earlier, so that's sitting there. I also want to create an attachment folder. So this is really where all those budget plan templates are going to sit. So I'm just going to put it out to the root directory here. Notice that I don't have any drive letters here. It's very important. This will not work with Drive Ledger. You have to actually map it to a shared drive. So this is a network drive here. You can see if I go back out to template and I come back out a bit, even though it's on the server, I'm still mapping it to that budget planning directory through the server name. Notice again, you can see we have some samples earlier. So this is really where all the planning spreadsheets are going to be, right? So put it out somewhere in your network where only the right people have access to it so that they can get to their specific spreadsheets when it becomes time. All right, so let me close that. So next step here, we have to select our hierarchy, right? So remember, beginning of this, we created our hierarchy. So when I select that, it's actually pulling in those departments from our hierarchy itself. Remember, we have the finance team as the header and our 3 departments in this case, even though they all really represent departments. I'm going to assign workflows to each of these. So remember, we have our department level workflow. So I'll do that for each of these. And then I'll have our top level for the finance, and then our department workflow as well here. So theoretically, I could have different workflows for different departments. We're going to keep this simple though. They're all going to use the same kind of one-step approval. And then the top level one, the finance one, has those 5 stages. All right, so as I'm scrolling down, you can see the next thing we have to do is set up some rules around each of those workflows as well. So at our top level, here's our different stages. So we have a couple questions here, or really a couple functions here. Do we want to be able to create associate budget plans? So we need to associate the departmental plans with our finance ones. So we will definitely want those for each stage here. You have the option in some of these stages not to allow that association or creation. In this case, I am just going to go ahead and do that for all of them. We also have the ability to add lines or modify lines. So this means that when we initially create our budget, let's say it has 600 lines in it. That's what our budget is for the year, based on those ledger accounts or whatnot. What this is saying is, am I allowing, based on the different stages, the ability for users to go in and add or update existing lines? So I can either add lines to this, so I can select a ledger account potentially that wasn't part of the initial budget plan, or do I not? So whatever is there is what the users have to use and nothing more. I'm going to, for our example, you can see if I add lines, I have the ability to modify those. If I leave that blank, then I can choose this separately. And then for each stage I can do a different template as well. So remember we have our, this is going to be a little tough here. We have our different templates. We're going to use our demo 2 template. For all of these, I do have the ability to see if I can scroll over to get to the right one here. Assume that was it because nope, it's all alphabetical. So let's see if I can pick the right one here. It's probably that one or not. Yeah, we'll find it through. There's our demo template. I guess is the next one. There it is, demo template 2. Let me go ahead and copy that. So I have to go through that exercise again and again and again. Each department, or each stage actually for a department, could have a different template, right? Based on what you want to show or not. We're going to keep this simple and we're going to use the same one throughout this demonstration. So I can just do that. All right, and now we're going to do the same thing on our departments. So again, I can have a different spreadsheet, a different template, just showing various, whatever I want to put into that one specifically. In this case, again, just to keep this pretty straightforward, whoops, it's going to want me to put that in there first. Do that. All right, so now that once that is done, we also can set some priority constraints here as well. So we have some of those priorities. Again, I'm not going to use that for this particular process. Really what we're saying is we have the ability to say, I want to put some priorities to these departments, so I have to do Department A before I can do Department B, for example. Okay, once I have all this in place, in order for us to make this active, we have an activate button. So we'll go ahead and click that. Once we do this, some of these features are locked in and we're, it is what it is. If we really can't go back and make some of these changes. So in that case, you'll have to create a new budget plan process and in effect, start over. So really important to get this all the way you want it, make sure that it's representing what you want, and then activate it. All right, get our info log here that has been activated. And at this point, we are ready now to begin our budget plan. All right, one quick thing though, before we dive into that, I promised to show you where we can configure in security the users and who has access to what. We do that in security administration. And then I go to my users right here. So on a particular user, remember one of our users was, let's just pick administrator. So actually administrator, I can click on here. All right. So notice that even though I'm an administrator, one of the roles I have assigned is a budget manager. There are actually 2 roles that you can assign so that people can execute or work on budget plans. One is the budget manager, the other is a budget clerk, right? Both of these allow access to budget planning. If a user does not have that role assigned, and remember our security model is based on security organizations, then they won't be able to access budget plans. Notice also that on the budget manager role, there's this function here called assign organizations that highlights. When I click on that, you can see now I have this subform that pops up to where I can say grant access to all organizations. So maybe this is more like for the CFO or something who really gets access to everything. Or I can say, you know what, specifically, this user only has access to specific hierarchy, right? And then within that hierarchy, I just go ahead and select that. You can see when I do that, it opens up the hierarchy we created earlier. And then I can assign them to one or all of the departments. Now, in this case, for the administrator, as I'm going to walk through this, I need to give myself access to everything. But if I only manage the IT department, then this is the only one I should have access to, which means that if I try to go to the budget plan for the operations department or sales and marketing, I'll get an error message basically saying I don't have right to see that specific data. So again, a very effective way to organize really by role who should have access to what. Then obviously you need to make sure that the right roles have that budget manager, right users, have those budget manager roles assigned to them. Okay. All right, let's detour back to budgeting. And at this point, we are going to generate budget plans. So notice there's a couple of ways we can do that. I can go into budget plan to manually just start creating it. Or what I can do is going into the periodic function down here, you can see we have budget plan generation and we have a few different options here. So I can generate a budget plan from the ledger, right? So I can actually create a budget plan from the ledger data itself. We'll walk through that because that's how I'm going to do it in a second. I can also do it from a previous budget plan. So if I did my budgeting last year, I still have those plans. I just want to copy that budget and use it as a starting point for this year. I can do that. I can also generate a budget plan from my fixed assets budget. So if you've created a fixed assets budget in that module, you can generate a budget plan from that. You can also generate a budget plan from forecast positions. So what that references is the HR module in AX 2012. So if you are using AX to do payroll, you can, and you have all your positions, your salaries, your benefits, and everything set up, then you can generate a budget plan from forecast positions. So this functionality will go in, it'll look at all your positions, all the compensation, all the benefits, all the costs that are associated with those plans, with those positions, and it'll generate a budget based on all that. There's a lot of configuration that goes into that, which is something that we will definitely cover on another day. And we're not going to do this as part of this demonstration, but just know that that functionality exists. All right, for us, we're going to go into generate budget plan from the budget general ledger. This is going to pop open a form. So I have some actions here that I want to do. First thing I want to do is I want to create a new plan. I'm going to aggregate it by fiscal year. Now I could do this by period. I could even do it by day. I really don't want to do that. I want to do one total for the year for each one. I could aggregate it out over 12 months and have a monthly budget for each one. I could start with the fiscal year I could start with a budget for the year and then as part of the process allocate that as well. But for our example, we're going to keep this pretty simple and just keep one value for the course of the year. You can see I have my sources, right? So I'm pulling from a fiscal year. So I just hit the drop down there. I know there's data in 2012. This is an old demo environment. Whoops, I'm going to reselect that. So it doesn't have data much beyond that, at least a set that we can use. So I'm going to go to period 1 here, and I'm also going to go to period 12, right? So this is the course of the year. Notice that I can select from a different account types. This is going to be for costs. I can do revenue budgeting separately or together if I want. Again, depends on how you manage that. We're just going to do expenses. I've also filtered out my accounts here. So in my selection criteria, you can see that I've got data specifically for a range of 600,000 to 6,999. If I hit the select button here, just like any other filter, you can see I can just enter in that criteria. I can add or I can change the criteria. For now, I'm going to leave that as I have it set up. So this is my source data. Where am I pulling it from? Into my plan, I have the target, right? So the first thing I'm going to say here is I have an option to do historical. Really what that represents is if I was doing this by period or even by day, do I want entries from actuals based that show the actual days themselves? The answer really is no, even though it's a little redundant. I just want one total for the year, so I'm going to say no. So one total per account for that year. Actually, for the account string. So if you think about the string, the account, and the dimensions that go with it. All right, so my budget planning process, I'm going to go ahead and select budgeting, right? The one we just set up. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. So here's our budget plan. And again, this is a free-form field, so I can just call it what I want. Let's just say budgeting. Just go with that. And really what I'm looking for now is the scenario, right? So which scenario do I want to do first? Well, I want to do my previous year actuals, right? Because I'm going to pull in my actual data. I'm going to create expense entries here. And these are budget class, right? So I can either have budget register entries of expense or revenue. I want to pull this into finance, right? I don't want to pull it into my departments. Again, remember, this is my top level. And whoops, you can see how to do that. I changed that again. And now you can also see here, I'm going to have a factor, right? So do I want to change this at all? I really don't. I want the actual values. You can see I can round those as well. You can see there was a preset here. In this case, I don't want to round my actuals. I want them to be what they really were. So I'm not going to change that. So a factor of 1. So now at this point, if I go ahead and hit generate, it's going to pull actual data from 2012 and put that into my budget plan. So it'll go ahead and work on that. We should get an info log once that's done. It's a little inconsistent at times, but we'll go ahead and wait for that. All right, so we'll go see. So I can do all budget plans, or I want to see active ones. I think in this case, there's some demo data in here. I'll just show you what that looks like. So we have all kinds of tests that were done previously. So I'm going to make this simpler for us and go and stay with active budget plans. So active budget plans are the ones where the planning process is active. In this case, you can see it generated a plan for me. I'm going to go ahead and open that up just so we can show you what that looks like. So we have previous year actuals. Again, within that range, you can see all the dimension values. And here are the actual amounts. Notice that we don't have anything yet in our previous year budget or previous year baseline. So we're going to go ahead and add that data next. I'm going to close this, go back out to our generate budget plan from general ledger. And now instead of creating a new plan, I'm going to update the existing one. So add new data to it. So I'm going to leave my source the same. This time I'm going to change this slightly. You can see we are now pulling from the spreadsheet, right, our budget plan. We want to put it into this one. This is the one we're going to append now, right? And now we're going to create our previous year budgeted. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say that our budget last year was 90% of what our actuals were, since I really don't have any budgeted data. So I'm going to go ahead, and now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to round these, right? So we don't really budget by pennies, we budget by thousands. So in this case, I'm going to round my values to the nearest thousand. So 90% of actuals rounded to the nearest thousand. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit generate. And now that's working on that. That should be done here. That may or may not pop up an info log as well, telling me that's done. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to go do this one more time. So now we're going to append it again. We're going to say no, some of these actually stay, some change, but now we're going to create our baseline. So there's our info log. So now we're going to create our baseline where we're saying, what am I going through and going to create for our baseline budget for this year? Well, let's say our baseline budget is 1.25. and I'm going to leave that rounding. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that as well. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our active budget plan now that we've gone through. We've generated 3 scenarios for it. Again, so we'll go to our header. Remember, we're in our initial stage. We've done our baseline. We've done our previous year actuals. You can see here, for example, 249 and change. Remember, our budget was like 90% of that, but it was rounded down. And then our baseline, which is our baseline budget, is 1.25%, so it's rounded up as well. So this is, again, for us, it's a starting point. We can use any and all methods to generate a scenario, if you will. That is our baseline budget. In this case, again, since we didn't have any data previously, you can see this is what we did, so we'll use this as our starting point for our baseline budget. Okay, so notice a couple of things. Again, as I talked about, we're in the initial stage, so we really haven't done anything yet. This is looking for us to submit. So that'll actually start the process of moving it along the stages and moving data through the scenarios. But really, if we want to, one of the things I'll point out is we just want to look at this or we want to work on this, we can do it a couple of ways. We can edit it here, as I've talked about in the plan itself. So I could easily come in, I could actually edit that, make a change, or we can go out to the worksheet. So if we click on worksheet right here, this should open up our template that we created. So our demo 2 template. So let's hold off on that for a second. So it's going through right now, it's pulling data from AX into our spreadsheet, and it should all right, there we go. So you can see it's gone ahead and populated that data. So remember, we have all 3 of our scenarios listed here as well, our previous year budgeted, our actuals, and our baseline. So now I have everything that I want to do from in an Excel perspective. I can filter, I can make updates, I can do anything and everything that Excel allows me to do in order to see or chunk out or make updates to this data. So you can see again within the grid there, we have all the data from our Excel, from our budget plan. So everything that's here is now here. So I could, if I wanted to, give this out to somebody who really doesn't necessarily have that access to AX. I can go in, make changes to this, and then update it as well. So let's just, as an example right here, let's go ahead and I'm going to make an update to this. I'm going to make that fairly easy for us to see. So I'm going to update my baseline. Now, once I make my changes, whatever that is, I can go ahead and publish that back. So if I hit publish, I can publish some of it or all of it. We only made a change, so it's going to hit all. And so this data now is writing back to our budget plan in AX. So we should see here momentarily another. Yep, there it is. So we can see another tab that's working on it here to publish that data back. This is a slow server, so it's going to take a second. All right, so now we can see we published our records back. So if we had multiple records, you can get a count of those. If any of them failed, it would tell us that as well. So now I can go ahead and I can save this. So I'll close this out. I can make that save to it. Yep. So we'll do that. And as it's doing that, I'm going to go back to our budget plan and I'm going to refresh it. When I do that, I should be able now, we did that on the baseline, so I should be able now to scroll down and find our update. There it is. So you can see we changed all those numbers, and you can see it wrote right back to AX. All right, so our next step here then is we now need to create our associate plans, right? So we need to create the 3 plans for those departments so that we can then push data specifically from here into each one of those. So to do that, we are going to go into New, and then you can see Associate Plan. So within the plan itself, the header plan or the main one, we're going to go Associate Plan, and we're going to create additional plan documents. We're going to do one for each of these. So I'll start out with sales marketing, and I'll start out with sales marketing. Sorry about that. And I'm going to go ahead and create a plan for that. So plan for sales and marketing. So we'll give it a name. I could prioritize it, but I'm not going to in this case. And once I do that, I'll go ahead and hit create. So you can see it's created a new plan. You can see the number here. Go ahead and close that. I'm going to create the other 2 as well. So give me a second to do that. All right, we'll do our last one here for the IT team. So you can name these whatever you want. You're not just doing it so I can identify it and be consistent. Go ahead and create that. Okay, so now we've created 3 budget plans. Each of these are empty right now. You'll see when we create those in the header, they start out in that department review. But right now they have no data, right? And that's fine because we're going to push data to it. So we'll close that. Now notice too, if I go to maintain over here and I see budget plans, you can see there they are. There's the 3 of them as well. I'm Tim in this case, so I'm the one that prepared those. So I'll come out and close that. Now if I hit refresh here as well, you can see there's my 3 plans. All right, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to go back into my header, my finance plan, and we're going to start our process, right? So I've created a plan, I've got everything here, I have a baseline, I've gone through, I've updated it to where I want it to be. So now we're going to walk through the piece where we start moving things along. So I'm going to submit, right? So I'm going to start my workflow. And remember, workflow is the engine that's going to drive and push all this forward. So finance team's going through this. We've got our baseline. We're ready for our departments to review. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And we're going to push to departments. And go ahead and hit submit. When I do that, notice now that I'll wait for it to refresh. And it's working through. I think the workflow is set for a minute or so, so I will give it a minute. And actually, I'm going to pause it for a second and let workflow do its thing. I'll come right back. Okay, so it's gone through. It's done its thing. So now you can see the message up here. Am I ready to distribute, right? So I put that in as part of my workflow. You can see the stage is also set to distribute. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, as the finance team, I'm ready to push this off to department. Now, I don't have to do an approval step here. I can just let this happen, or I can put like a task or something to say I'm ready, or I can just let it go. In this case, I built in a step because I wanted to stop along certain pieces along the way. And I really want someone to approve the fact that we're good for department. So I'm going to approve that. And let's say hit distribute to departments. We'll go ahead and approve that. And I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh. And now it's going to go through its workflow. It's going to take a minute and populate that data. So let's hold off a second. I'll let workflow do its thing. So give me a second for that. Okay, so I've given it a minute. You can see we're still in a distribute stage, which is fine for now on the header. I know that it's done its thing because if I go into workflow and to view history, you can see that it's gone through and actually done some of these tasks, right? So some of the steps we talked about earlier, as far as allocating to departments, right, has been done. So if I close this, and now I go into one of these department ones, you can see if I open it up on the sales and marketing, if I click on it, you'll see now that I've pushed data from that top level plan, each of those scenarios, right? Or each of these as well. So the previous year budgeted, the baseline, and now here's that department requested, which is also a copy of that baseline. So if we go back to our spreadsheet, remember, we want to take this data, submit it to the department, and then push it to these two fields. And we still have this one here on the department level. So I guess I could have pushed the actuals as well, but for this sample, I chose not to. So again, we have our three scenarios here, and this under department review. So now these have gone out to the department heads. So now if I want to, I can generate worksheets for each of those if I want, or I can just give them access to come in here and do this, again, depending on whatever works for us. And in our budget plan process, the departments will now go through, look at what they want, look at the baseline budget, right? Which is also this department requested. They can go through now and make changes to it. They can update this how they want. So let's say in this case, we'll make an edit. So for this particular cost, you know what? I need to make that different. I'll make that a little distinct. So I can go ahead and make those updates. I can go to my worksheet. Again, as I demonstrated earlier, we can send these worksheets out to the departments. They can make their changes and then send that back to us, or and send it back to us when they're done. We can push that data back into AX, into this plan. Once they are ready to do this, though, once their department has gone through, reviewed it, they've made their changes, we would then submit it, right? So each department then will submit their requested budget, if you will, back up, as we talked about, to the finance team, right? So we look back at our scenario, they're going to go through, submit it, and then push it back up to the top. So we're going to walk through that now for each one. I've made a change on one of them. We're going to go through, submit, and push that data back. I'll make a change in each one of these, and then we'll see some of those changes. So let me go ahead and submit this. So again, workflow is our engine for this. We're going to submit this back. So you can see if I start, we'll let workflow do its thing on that first one. I'm going to do this to the other two as well. You can watch me do this. So again, the same thing. You can see we're in that review. I'm going to edit this. I'm just going to make a couple of changes to these as well. So we can do 7. Just make them a little distinct from the rounded values. And again, the same thing. I'm going to submit this. I'm done with it. We'll assume that the department's gone through and done what they need to do with it. I'll close that out and I'll go to the third one. And let's just do the same thing. I'm going to make a change. You can see I'm already getting some alert notifications that there's some approvals. So I guess as a department head. Now, again, this is all going to be specific to whoever is reviewing those. So for our demo, I'll probably end up doing most of the approvals for these. But we set that up as part of the workflow process. So the department heads or the finance team or whoever is going to approve that, you obviously build that all in as part of your process. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and submit that third one. And now I come back out. I want to come back out to our page here. You can see the workflow status has changed for these. And as I go in, there's an approval step for each of these now. I'm going to go ahead and approve that. I'll let that go take its course while I do this. approve that. See if he's ready for that. Yep, we'll go ahead and approve that one as well. So each of the departments is going through doing the approval. Now, obviously, this isn't something that would be done in the course of a few minutes. We could take a couple of weeks or whatever the timing is that you have as part of your process. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is have all these departments submit their particular budget plans. On the header plan, if I look, I can see, it's kind of hidden right here, but I can see the status or the stage really for each one of these as well, right? So I can see the stage that they're in. I can see that they're good. Once they're submitted, if I just go ahead and refresh this a little bit, here we go. You can see now that these are all submitted, right? So I know I only have 3 departments. I can be checking this along the way. So if this is over the course of a couple of weeks, I can come in here to my main plan and see, all right, what's the status of all the ones associated with that main plan? Okay, very good. So now I come back into my main plan. I'm going to open that up again. If I go and look in my main plan here, we're still here at the distribute. Now I'm going to move this forward as well by working the next step here of the process in order to aggregate or bring all that data back into my main plan from the departments. All right, so to do that, we're going to go ahead and again, with workflow being the engine to move this forward, are all my department plans submitted? I'm going to go ahead and complete that. If you remember in the workflow we looked at earlier, we have a task at this point to do this. I'm going to say that task is complete. So I've gone out, I've checked that all the departments have submitted their specific plans, that they're good to go. And now we're going to aggregate those back to my main plan. If all those weren't ready, if all those associated plans weren't ready, AX would not allow me to move forward with this step. So I'm going to go ahead and complete that. And now by doing this, I'll let workflow go through, and now we'll wait for it to change again. Give it a minute or so, and the planning stage should change, and now we should see that department data come back here as well. All right, so we've gone through, I've refreshed this again. You can see the stage is now changed to aggregate. So it's gone through, it's moved data back from those departments into our main budget. You can see that now because if I go here to our budget plan lines, you can see there are more scenarios. Remember in our scenario constraints, where we limited some of those constraints by the stage. Now, in this stage from aggregate forward, we want to see all 5 of these stages, right? So if I look at department requested, you can see that the department requested stage is now populated with data, and that came from our department templates. We can see that because we should be able to find some of those updated values that we're talking about earlier. So let's take a look. See if we can see some of those. Scroll through that. There we go. So you can see, okay, that was one we made a change earlier. There we go. So again, there was one of the changes we made. We changed that value in part of the departments. Now you can see that data has come back from the department to the department spreadsheet itself to our header. All right. So now at this point, as part of our process, our next stage is, again, I'll come reference back to our sheet here, is we've come back, we've done this, we've moved everything, we've got a total approved stage now. Now we want the CFO to go through and review this, make any changes to it along with the finance team. If that's good, then we'll approve it. So coming back here now, we are going to once again go forward with our workflow and move it to the next stage. Okay, so we're ready to do that. You can see all aggregates are done. So that's my next stage here. So I'm going to go ahead and approve it. So yeah, everything came back. Everything looks good. And now we're ready for our CFO review stage to occur. So I'm going to approve that. Yep, everything came back from the departments. We've looked it over. It looks good. So we'll go ahead and refresh that. And now we'll wait here and wait for our change to occur. All right, so we now see I did refresh it and we're now at the CFO review. So now the CFO can go through and make their changes. So any changes we want them to make, we would want them to do here. They can also, again, go back to the worksheet and make some changes there. So they have the option to go through, open up the spreadsheet, make sure that they can work off there, or they come in here and do it again, whatever is easier for them, and make whatever changes they want, let's say to the total approved. So they can compare all the scenarios by that spreadsheet. So let's just go ahead and open that up for a second. Okay, so we're letting it do its thing here. Going to open up Excel. Probably going to see some accounts that might have some zeros in there. Again, we pulled in data other than just for those 3 departments. But you can see if I'm the CFO, I can now look across like the ones that were for one of the departments that we had, 23, 25, so forth. You see sales and marketing, a few others in here. But you can see though, now I can go ahead and make any changes that I want. I can see what the baseline was. I can see what the departments want. I can make my changes or I can leave it as is, go through everything here and then write that back to my budget plan. So once I've done all that, now we'll save that for now. Once I've done that, is my review complete? As the CFO, you can see that's the stage. If I'm good, at that point, I'll go through and I can approve it. So when I do, wait again, I can go ahead and now, if I see if we can catch it right away, if I go ahead and update it, we should be able to change it from CFO review to approved. All right, let's go ahead and see. Yep. So now we can see the stage has gone to approved. You can see my document status is finalized, the workflow is approved, so we're in fact done. So we've walked through all the steps, if you recall, from all the stages, from our initial creation to the departments to the CFO, and now we've approved it. All right, so now one last step that we might want to do here is, now that we've created our budget plan, I'll come back here, I can now generate budget register entries from my budget plan. To do that, I'll come down here to periodic, generate budget register entry, and this brings up a form similar to the one where we generated the ledger entries initially for our plan. In this case, what we're doing is we're saying, let's go find our budget process. And whoops, all right, close that. And let's go ahead and select our finance department here. Let's go select our document number. So this is our budgeting, and we want our scenario. This is the key value here. We want to take that total approved amount, right? And go through and push that off and create our budget register entries. So in this case, again, I'm going to create register entries. I'm just going to do them for the year. I'm going to leave them as is. So this is going to go to our budget model, fiscal year 2019. We have a budget code of original budget. So that's going to be our original budget for the year. I'm not going to do any factoring or anything. I can put in a reason code if I want. And it's not going to do as a batch because I know it won't take too long. And I'm going to go ahead and hit generate. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We'll wait for that to complete. So this is going through and creating a budget register entry for me for my plan. So now, once I've done this, you can see, oh, we've got budget check turned on, so I think we can ignore that for the moment. Come into our budget register entries, and now we'll go ahead into all budget register entries. You can see here is what we just created. It should be, so we'll go ahead and open that up. And you can see it's created a budget register from our entries, right? And here are those total amounts. So at this point, we can go ahead and review this and post it. When we post it, obviously that is our original budget for the fiscal year. All right. So at a high level, what we've done then is we have finished our cycle. So again, we've gone through everything. We did our configuration. We walked through our planning process, configured that. We generated entries. We created budget plans from those and walked through the process of those from start to finish. And then once we were done with that, we generated budget register entries and have them here ready to post. So again, we've walked through this cycle. So our finance team, our departments, we went through our stages and populated our scenarios based on those stages to really get to this value here. That was an approved budget that we then published to our general ledger. With that, thank you very much. I know this takes a little time and effort to go through, but it's definitely worth it in the long run. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me on the link below. Thank you.